Hi everyone. In this video we are going to talk about how to crack SNAP. Now SNAP is a test that I have closely monitored in the last several years and I have taken it multiple times. So in this video I'm also going to share my experience of taking the test and what my strategy is to generally score in the range of 99.9 and above. We are also going to understand what are the IMS resources that you should be looking at and how to prepare and how to strategize for the test. So let's get started. Now the first thing that I'm going to start with is going to be the overview of the test. Now when you look at SNAP as a test, it's a completely speed based exam. So the way I see it, it's like a T20 game where you have to be really fast. You don't have a lot of comeback opportunities. So it's a 60 minute 60 question test, and if you look at the format, you have 15 questions in the English section or the language skills section. In the analytical and logical reasoning, that's the most dominant part of the test, that has 25 questions, and the quant and the DI section is 20 questions. So total 60 questions to be done over 60 minutes. When you look at the marking scheme, it is +1 and -0.25, so there's a 1/4 negative. So for every question that you get wrong, you're going to get a penalty in this case. Now we have given a suggested time. Of course, this will vary from student to student, but there is a recommendation that we have given that you should not be spending more than this, because then the return that you get for every minute that you invest in that particular section isn't great. See, there are no sectional cutoffs, so you have to play according to your strength. You should not be thinking that, okay, I should be spending only this much time or I should not spend less than this. This is just a recommendation that we have, so do not go more than this. In most cases, the 15 questions that you have in the English section, you should be able to complete these in about 10 minutes also. If you look at the analytical and logical reasoning, 24 to 26 minutes is the recommended time, and this typically you should be splitting. So the first round that you do, you should be spending somewhere close to 15 minutes or so, and then you do a second round wherein you do the moderate level questions from that particular section. And similarly for quant, the suggested time is going to be around 20 to 22 minutes. Anything more than that may not be very helpful. For example, let's say if somebody spends 30 minutes in the quant section, is that the best utilization of one's effort? The answer is no. Right? So you should not be doing that way. You should set a timer for yourself that, okay, roughly this is the amount of time that I'm going to spend. So I'll talk about my strategy also as we progress in this session as to how do I solve my paper and how do I do it in rounds. Now, this is where my rant with Snap is going to start. So, if you look at Snap, the only problem with Snap is that they don't normalize the scores. And I'm sure by now you know this already, but just in case you are somebody who is not aware of that, you should be thinking of, let's say, taking it multiple times, right? In case you're already registered for multiple attempts, nothing like that. So, why Snap no normalization is a problem? Let me walk you through that. So I'm showing just two examples from thousands of examples that we have, and this is from last year's SNAP. So these are actual scorecards of the students, of IMS students, and as you see, the first test that happened, which was on the 10th December, the students scored 47, and the test that happened on the 22nd, the students scored 36. Now what SNAP does is that they pick the maximum score that you get and use that for the percentile calculation. So in this case, the first student, 47 was the score that they used for the final percentile calculation. If you look at the student ended up taking test on 17th and 22nd December, and the scores were 50.25 and 44.50. Now if you notice this, on the 17th December, the student got a score of 50, and on 22nd, the student got a score of 44. In 5 days, the score dropped by 6 marks roughly, right? Let's keep it somewhere around 6 marks. Now, it's not that the student didn't study anything in that period, right? Or in the first case, if you look at it, from 47 to 36, from 10 December to 22nd December. So this is not because, let's say, the student is not putting the effort or they are not performing up to their potential. This is purely because of the difficulty of the test. So in a lot of cases, and we have observed this over several years of SNAP, that the difficulty of the test has fluctuated a lot from slot 1 to slot 2 to slot 3. So how difficult will the test be? That is a little difficult to comment on. And I also have a lot of data that I'm going to share with you. So in fact, what I did was I put together scores of last 4 years of SNAP for each of the percentile brackets. and I have put 75 percentile. I have not gone below this because if you're looking at the top institutes, let's say the top 5-6 colleges, you are definitely looking at least a 75 percentile score on the SNAP. So a lot of times students have this question as to how much should I get in terms of my raw score so that my percentile will be so much. But see, if you look at this particular table, you will realize that there is no way to answer that question in a definite manner. So for example, let's look at something like a SNAP 2020. 99 percentile was 46 marks out of 60. If you look at the same 99 percentile mark in SNAP 22, it was 37.75. So it was a fairly difficult test, because of which people were scoring on the lower side. Same thing if you look at SNAP 23, slightly easier test, slightly comparable to SNAP 2020, and that's why you see a lot of those numbers very close by. You see a 49 here, you see a 50 here, you see a 47, you see a 47 here. So SNAP 23, if you look at the final scoring that has happened, percentile versus the score, the maximum score of the 3 SNAP attempts that are there, you see that it's very close to a SNAP 2020, right? So 2020-23 were fairly similar. For some particular reason, SNAP 22 was the toughest of the last 4 years of SNAP that we have seen. So there is no answer to that question as to how much should I score to get to a certain percentile. What we know for sure is that you should be aiming for as high as possible, obviously, and anything above 45, right, is generally going to be a very, very good score. Because if you look at, say, an SIBM Pune, the cutoff is generally 98 percentile. And let me go through last 4 years, right? It shows that 44, 41, 43. So at least my aim has to be scoring more than 40 if I'm somebody who is thinking of SIBM Pune. The higher the better, obviously. So if you are closer to say 44, 45, 46, that is always better if you're targeting SIBM Pune. So that should be the bare minimum thing that I target. The other problem with SNAP, and as I said, right, it's going to be a bit of a rant there. The other problem is the difficulty of the test. So because the test is not very, very difficult, the problem is that in a small difference, right, you are going to have a lot of difference in terms of percentile. So for example, let's look at this. There is a 1 mark difference between, say, a SNAP 21's column. 1 mark difference in the score corresponds to 2 percentile difference, right? So you're going to have a lot of people who are sitting in a very tight range. Same thing if you look at, say, here, last year, SNAP 23. Look at the gap, which is again 1 mark, which has translated into a 2 percentile difference on the final score. If you look at even, say, something like this, right, 40 and 37.75, it's just 2.25 mark difference, which is a 3 percentile gap. At the lower level, it in fact becomes higher. So if you look at this one, 32.75 versus 31, it's hardly any difference, but the percentile difference is of 5. Okay, so every mark, every 0.25 is going to count, because it is going to push your score up. So be very, very careful with respect to how many attempts do you make and what is your accuracy. So by factoring all of that in, then only you take the entire test. Okay, so that's what I wanted to share on the target score front to answer the question as to how much should I score to get to a certain percentile. Okay, you can take a screenshot of this, because there's a very detailed research information that is available that is typically you will not be able to find at other places. Alright, now let's talk about what are the areas to focus on. So SNAP, as I said, is a test of speed, and most of the questions you will see that they are not very, very difficult questions. But the challenge is to do those questions in the limited time that is available. So in general English, the English section that they have, you have basically everything, right? But in the last few years, you have seen that they don't ask RCs anymore. So at a point of time, they used to ask RCs as well as part of those 15 questions. But then in the last few years, they have stopped asking RCs. So you're mostly not going to get passages here. So those of you who typically don't like solving RCs, this is a very good news for you. But for those of you who like it, there is a disappointment there that there typically won't be any RCs. You're going to get questions that are direct in nature, converting something from active voice to passive voice, right? Figure of speech. So figure of speech is one thing that they've always asked. Every single year we have seen questions being asked on this. So if you're thinking of cracking SNAP, this is something that you will definitely have to study. So go to your grammar book. Those of your IMS students, of course, you have that thing with you. But those of you who are not IMS students, you can also do a bit of a grammar practice. Then fill in the blanks question. These are typically tense based, spelling based or conjunction based questions. Okay, so conjunction is another area that I would suggest all of you to focus on. Then phrases and idioms. So again, questions related to what is the meaning of this particular idiom. Synonym, antonym, which are vocab based questions, and the odd word out questions. Sometimes these are also spelling based questions, so identifying what is the correct spelling or which of the word is different in meaning compared to the other words that are there. Moving on to the next section, which is analytical and logical reasoning. Now for analytical and logical, again, they ask 1 to 2 questions of pretty much all the types that are there. Not very difficult questions, but yes, you will have to do all the areas to be in a position where you can say that I'll be able to do most of the questions. So starting from syllogisms, course of action, assumption, conclusion, inference, argument. So pretty much the entire critical reasoning thing that you have. Then logical puzzles, it could be standalone logical puzzles. Clocks and calendars is another area that is favorite of Snap, where typically you will see 1 or 2 questions. Now I know somebody is thinking that there's going to be one question on clocks, why should I study clocks? But the thing is, clocks questions are generally easy. So if you spend some time, and clocks is not going to take, let's say, more than 3 to 4 hours of prep. If you prepare that much, you'll be able to answer that one question, and that one question, 1 mark, can make a lot of difference, as we have seen on the previous slide, right? From a 92, potentially somebody can even jump to a 95, right? So that is why every mark matters a lot when it comes to Snap. Now there are a lot of questions on coding, decoding, family tree, sequential output, and so on. So sequential output, another input output as we call it. So this is one thing which most of you are prepared for NMAT have already prepared. So you don't have to do it separately, but in case you haven't prepared for NMAT, sequential output, input output, have a look at that. Typically 1 or 2 questions is what you can expect. Then questions could be on circular arrangement, coding, decoding, binary logic, and Venn diagram. Binary logic we have generally not seen a lot, but if a question comes, typically it will be one question or so, right? So these are the questions that typically have that there's somebody who is a truth teller, there's somebody who is a liar, and then there's somebody who is an alternator, and the statements are given, and you have to figure out who is the truth teller, who is the liar, and alternator, right? So those kind of questions. And finally, direct questions on Venn diagrams. Okay, so again, those of you prepared for CAT or NMAT or other exams, you already prepared Venn diagram a little bit. In Snap, we have seen that the questions aren't very difficult from Venn diagram. And then comes the quant section. So for those of you who have fear of calculation, you don't like data interpretation, there's a good news for you that typically DI questions don't make an appearance, and even if they do, they are typically 1 or 2 questions. Most of it is going to be arithmetic, modern math, geometry, numbers, algebra, right? The 5 areas that you have on the quant, the major areas, that's what they ask questions from. No data interpretation. And in fact, in some of the years, there haven't been any questions on data sufficiency also. So though they call it data sufficiency as a section, there are no questions sometimes on data sufficiency. Okay, so majority of it is just pure quant questions that you're going to get. So let's talk about individual areas further, and what I've done is I've taken the last couple of years and tried finding the number of questions from each of the areas so that you know what to focus on, right? So for example, there were questions on compound word last year, right? So compound word, if you think of it, just the question was the word is given, identify which of the following is a compound word, right? If you look at grammar, for example, sorry, I just quickly erase this, just a minute, yeah. Then questions from grammar, these are 5 to 8 questions that we have seen in the last few years. So ensure that you study a lot of grammar. Synonym based questions or synonym antonym based questions, you can have only 1 or 2, not more than that. We also seen poem based questions. Now don't think that this is similar to the ZAT kind of poems that are there. This is going to be pretty straightforward, but it was more on inference basis, right? That as to what exactly the poem is trying to say. And the poem again is not very long, it's just 4 to 5 lines that are given, and you have to answer questions based on it. Then spelling based questions, wherein you have to identify what is the right spelling of the word. Now I'm sure that a lot of you must be thinking, why should I be studying for this, because it's just one question. See, sometimes you get lucky and sometimes you get very easy words, maybe you know them already, sometimes you don't. So I don't see the point of doing a lot of vocabulary, because no matter what you do, there will always be words that you're not aware of. Having said that, do not think that I'll not do anything from vocab, because you also have maybe your NMAT coming up, or you have MyCat or some other exam. There also vocabulary is going to be important. So study for vocab whatever you can. I'm not going to say that you do only, let's say, 1,000 words or 2,000 words or whatever, But whatever organic development of vocabulary happens through reading, just focus on that, and then you may have to mug up some words in case you have never done vocabulary in life. Then change the tone. So you have a lot of times you have this thing where they ask you to change from active voice to passive voice, or they ask you to identify which of the following, what is the tone, or which of the following is an assertive statement. So statements are given and you have to identify which is the assertive one. So they can give a different tone there instead of assertive as well. And then, as I said, converting from passive voice to active voice and all of that. And then questions related to prefix and then proverb based and so on and so forth, right? So whatever we saw on the previous slide, all of those areas get covered in some or the other way. The number of questions typically would not go beyond 2 to 3 questions from the individual areas that are there, except the grammar one, because if you put everything together, right, the fill in the blanks one or identify the error one, 5 to 8 questions is what you can expect. So that is what I'm going to focus on the most, because there are very limited rules of grammar that I'll have to study to do well on this particular area. Now my strategy when it comes to general English section is that I spend the initial 7 to 8 minutes on this section. Okay, I do not spend more than that. That is to answer all the easy questions from this, because there are only 15 questions. You are not going to need a lot of time to read these questions. So in the first 7-8 minutes, I mark whatever questions that I can do from general English section, and then I move to the next section, which typically is either logic or quant depending on my mood that day. But I hope people don't do that and have a set strategy that this is the order in which I'm going to proceed, and I'm going to solve it in rounds. What we'll do is we'll talk about the analytical and logical reasoning section, wherein I've more or less covered what are the areas, but let's also talk about the number of questions. Now, as I said, the number of questions from individual areas will not be very high. You can get anywhere between 1, 2, 3, 4 questions. So as you can see in the last few years, this has been the distribution. So statement and assumption, only 1 or 2 questions. Strengthening, weakening arguments, right? Again, 1 or 2. Syllogisms question, right? Then course of action, decision making, 2 to 4 questions is what you can get from this, right? Cause and effect too. So if you look at this entire, the initial bracket that you have, right? This could be anywhere between 6 to 8 or 9 questions that are part of the overall critical reasoning, as we call it. Then you have miscellaneous questions, which are standalone logic puzzles. It could be coding, decoding, it could be anagram based, etc. In some years, they have also asked really arbitrary puzzles that a lot of, I would say 90-95% of the people will not be able to answer. But that's okay, those are one-off questions and you can live with that. Series, another thing that they ask a lot, 2 to 4 questions is what you can expect. Clocks and calendars, as I said, 2 topics that a lot of people don't do, but in fact very easy topics to cover. So make sure that you study these 2. Regarding direction, so simple direction based question, it could be where the person is towards the end of that entire information that is given, or the distance, the shortest distance or the total distance covered kind of questions. So here also 1 to 4 questions can be expected. Family tree, another area that they always ask. So blood relations is what you should be studying. Sequential output and binary logic. Okay, so sequential output, binary logic, as I said, they haven't asked a lot of questions, but I'll still do it because see, these are the topics that are not very difficult to master. Binary logic, for example, I do let's say 10-15 questions of binary logic. I know how to approach it. Sequential output, maybe I do let's say 15-20 sets. I know how to approach it, right? So at least I'll be able to make an attempt while I'm taking the test. So coming to what is my approach, generally what I try to do is about 10 to 15 questions is what I'll do in the first round, which are all the easy questions from this. Because see, you're going to have a lot of direct questions that you can just read it and you know what exactly you're supposed to do. But there'll be some questions that are, let's say, lengthy, or some questions that are tricky in nature. In that case, you just shift it to your second round. So 10 to 15 questions in the first round, that is going to be somewhere around 10 to 15 minutes again, because thinking of 1 minute per question kind of a rate. And once I spend that, I move on to the next section. So either I'll do quant first, as in English, then quant, then logic, or English, logic, and quant, depending on my mood. But in quant, again, because you don't have a lot of difficult topics or questions that they ask, these are generally very straightforward. Now, those of you who have prepared for CAT, you already know more or less everything that you have to do, that you can get in Snap. You don't have to prepare your quant separately, unless there were some areas that you didn't do at the time of your CAT preparation. So focus on those areas. For example, let's say maybe some of you had dropped geometry. So this is a good time to just go through the basics, because even if you know the basics, you should be able to answer most of the questions. So last year, out of 20, a good candidate would have easily got 17, 18, 19 questions. It wasn't very, very difficult to get there. Okay. Data interpretation, as I said, one or two questions. Either it can be a table or a bar chart or a line graph kind of a thing. There could be a Venn diagram also, but they will not exceed typically one or two questions that they have asked, because this is last few years. So if things haven't changed too much or they haven't deviated from that a lot, let's expect that they'll not do it this year. But of course, once the snap 1 happens, we will know if there are any major changes for this year. And again, here also my strategy is the same. Identify which are the easy ones. 10 to 15 minutes to do those, roughly about 15 questions is what I generally am able to identify. So then I am at about 7, 15, 15, right? So about 37 odd minutes, and about slightly more than 40 attempts is where typically I will be. And then you can push on the area that you are good at. So if you're good at, let's say, logic, then you do more questions of logic. If you're good at quant, then you can try and do more questions of quant. At the same time, also factor in the accuracy bit, because see, if you take unnecessary risks, sometimes it is going to hurt you. So that is why the 10 mock tests that have been given to you, try whatever strategies that you want to try in those 10 mocks. So do not go to the test and then try something different. You have 10 total mocks that you have given to IMS students, and you can take those practice tests and then fine tune your strategy. So this is my final advice regarding strategy and resources, right? The first one is going to be focus on the areas that are most relevant for Snap. I am not going to do anything that they are not going to ask. Those of you are like very, very serious about getting into symbiosis, you want to crack Snap, focus on the areas that we discussed today, because this is from last 4 years of data, so they haven't changed that too much. So if you work on this, you should be able to get most of the questions in the actual test as well. Second is going to be decide the order in which you want to take the test, in which you want to do the first round, because you can always do a second round. And generally that is what I have found personally to be a good strategy, where you are able to go through most of the questions. Because see, if you think like this, that initial 15 minutes I'll do only verbal, then 20 minutes I'll do only quant, and then the remaining time I'll do only LR, generally that is not a good strategy. Okay, so try it in rounds. I hope it works for people. Third is going to be maintaining both speed and accuracy. So you cannot say I'm very, very fast but my accuracy is terrible, or I am highly accurate but my attempts are on the lower side, because both of those situations are not ideal situations. You have to find a balance between your speed and accuracy, and keep in mind the score table that we discussed, right? So I have to ensure that my attempts are enough, considering, let's say, if you have 80% accuracy or 85% accuracy, to get to that particular score, how many attempts will I need, so that I'm in a position to say, okay, fine, at least this much I'll be able to get on the testing. Now regarding resources, what you should be focusing on. So you have 10 full length tests, right? These are snap mocks and these are 1 hour duration. So anybody who is thinking that, okay, I'm not going to take all of them, it's just 10 hours of your life, right? So please ensure that you take all of them. When to do 10, that can be a good question. So for those of you who are planning to take only one snap attempt, of course finish all 10 mocks prior to that. Those of you are planning to do 2 snap attempts, I'll say split equally, 5 and 5. Those of you are planning to do 3 attempts, I'll say at least 5 for the first attempt, then 3 for the second, and 2 for the third. So that is how I'll split it. Either all before first attempt, 5-5, or 5-3-2. So that's a nice distribution in my view. And then you also have 20 ADMAT masterclasses, because these cover those additional topics that you're going to get on Snap and even other exams that are out there. And module 5 of CAT courseware for those of you who were CAT students with us. Okay, so these are the resources that you focus on. Snap is not a very difficult test. Having said that, it's a difficult test to crack because of the reasons that we described in the initial part of the video, that there's no normalization, and every single mark or every 0.25 as well can make a lot of difference to your percentile. So if you have any questions regarding Snap, feel free to leave it as a comment. I hope this video has helped you, and in case there's anything that you want to ask, let me know. I'll be very happy to answer your questions. Thank you so much for watching. Wish all of you all the best.